Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the launch of The Will of Missouri, The Lifetimes and Influence of Alexander William Doniphan. This book was created and compiled by the Alexander Doniphan Committee. My name is Dave Burns. I'm the Story Center Publication Manager. And we're just excited for you to be here with us this evening and to enjoy this broadcast. This program is part of our State of Stories programming, which is happening in conjunction with the bicentennial. For the next year, the Story Center is partnering with the University of Missouri's Extension Community Arts Program to offer a series of programs that commemorate the Missouri bicentennial, and this publication is part of that. Called State of Stories, a series of free public programs features storytelling performances and workshops, book conversations, humanities programs that explore the history and culture of the Show Me State. Funding has been provided in part by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation and the William T. Kemper Foundation. And for more information, please see the State of Stories website. Tonight, we are honored to have Steve Potter and Jeremiah Morgan here to speak with us as members of the Doniphan Committee and part of this compilation project. So at the end of the conversation, we will have an opportunity for individuals to do a Q&A with our panelists. But for the moment, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dave. It's great to be with you, and great to be with Steve tonight to kick off or launch the book, The Will of Missouri, as Dave described. We're grateful for the opportunity that the Mid-Continent Public Library has provided, not only for the launch of this, but the tremendous support that they have provided, of course, with Steve's direction, influence. Steve and I go back along a number of years, and it's been a privilege to work with him on this project. I thought I would start, I happen to be an attorney by practice, and so Alexander Doniphan is near and dear to my heart for those purposes, but for many other purposes. And I thought I would start this evening by just saying a few things about Alexander Doniphan and his role and what gave rise to this project. Alexander Doniphan, born in 1808 in Kentucky, was then studied law not far from there in Kentucky, and ultimately in 1830 he sat for the bar in Missouri, going at that time almost as far, well, certainly as far west as you could go in the United States and still be within the United States, and studied law and passed the bar, or was sat for the bar in Missouri and in 1830, and then ultimately practiced law first in Lexington, Missouri, and then ultimately in Liberty, Missouri, where he spent many, many years in the practice of law there. Now, interestingly, again, so much of this is going to be in the book, but I just give a little bit of a sketch, a life sketch, and his influence. But interestingly, he would practice law with David Rice Atchison, a senator from the state of Missouri, who would become a senator later. And they practiced law in Liberty, and did that beginning in 1833. So not too long after the Liberty and Clay County came into existence, they were some of the first lawyers in the area. Now, Doniphan was well known for his oratorical skills. He was, by all accounts, a great lawyer, great orator. And so from a storytelling standpoint, as we know, that's one of the things that at that time in particular, really, lawyers, that's what they did. They told a story to the jury and to the judge. So that was a real talent of Alexander Doniphan. Other things that he did of great significance. Now, he had a tremendous military career. Part of that he was part of the Missouri militia, and as it turns out in the 1838, in the what we call the Mormon War in Missouri, he was a brigadier general in the militia there. And then ultimately, he also was a colonel in the regular army that was involved in the Mexican-American War. So some very important roles there. He was not only a lawyer of distinction, but he undertook some very important things. And part of the reason why I sit here is I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as well. And he had a very significant influence in early Missouri with respect to that church. It was a very new church, and one of his clients, those that he represented, included the church and its leaders. So there's a very famous effort that he made to save the lives of the early leaders of the church, including Joseph Smith and his companions. So it was a tremendous work that he did, and I can share a little bit of that as we continue the conversation. But had great renown not only as a lawyer and as a military leader, but also in business and in other areas. One of the things that we learn from the book and from the history is that he was instrumental in the founding of a college, what we know as William Jewell College, that's in Liberty, Missouri today. Interestingly, though he was involved or responsible for the founding of it, they didn't name it after him. He had the humility and good sense to have it named after somebody else, a doctor out of Columbia, Missouri, and so founded that college there in Liberty, Missouri. And then because of the things that he has done or that he did throughout his career, lots of things are named after him, of course, all over the state of Missouri. Doniphan roads and Doniphan County and Doniphan towns and so forth. To continue on with his life, though, he married in Liberty and ultimately had 2 sons. Tragically, his wife passed away, and in fact, in the part that I write, a small chapter in this book, I describe or talk a little bit about that, as do others in their portions of the book. But tragically, his wife passed away, and then ultimately his 2 children also passed away, both before the age of 18. So he really lived a life of tragedy. When the Civil War broke out, he was in favor of the Union, which is an interesting break since his law partner, David Rice Atchison, Senator Atchison, became a Confederate officer. And so they had a split about that, and he ultimately went to St. Louis for the duration of the war and was in favor of retaining the Union. And so they had a split over that. And once the war was over, then Alexander Doniphan returned to his practice in Liberty and in Richmond, Missouri. So he did a law practice in Richmond, Missouri, and in Liberty and in Independence. And so my part, and we can talk about it a little bit later, I wrote a historical fiction about a trial that he had that I set in that area and in that time. So he returned to his normal life, but he was so well known throughout the state of Missouri, and part of that was also not only because of his lawyering throughout that area and his renown for leading the military march across the United States, which ended up during the Mexican-American War being the longest march in U.S. history, 5,500 miles. Can you imagine? 5,500 miles. And they had great success in that. Ultimately, part of what they did was they ended up in New Mexico, what is now New Mexico, and another piece of his influence is that he wrote what would become the Bill of Rights for the New Mexico Constitution. So he had tremendous influence in not only the practice of law, but also in forming the law. And so, again, he returned following the Civil War, following the Mexican-American War, returned to Clay County and practiced law and lived out his life there. He lived to the age of till 1887. So for that time period, 79 years is quite a long time. He lived, of course, beyond his wife and his 2 sons, and ultimately is buried in Liberty, Missouri, and with a monument there, not too far from where he helped to found the William Jewell College. So he had a very distinguished career that covered not just being a lawyer, but covered all kinds of areas. And that's, as we, I know Steve will talk a little bit about that, as we talked about the importance and the influence of Alexander Doniphan, one of the greatest things was not just the importance, the intensity of his work in a certain area, which, for example, for my interests, his legal work, including the legal work for the church and his church leaders early in those days, but also just the breadth of his work and what he did with his life. So a really tremendous career. It was a thrill and a privilege to be able to work on this project and to collect for these purposes just a variety of different stories. And I know Steve will talk a little bit about this in his remarks, but that's what was intended to be captured by this anthology, and that is just a variety of different types of stories relating to his life and the various roles that he plays, from military to legal to educator and beyond. So tremendous life.
Well, before I take over and talk a little bit about the project itself and how it came to be and the work around creating the project, I have a question for you, Jeremiah, because we did talk about Alexander Doniphan. And when I first found out about him, I found out, I think the first time I heard about him involved his military exploits in the Mexican War and sort of the securing of Santa Fe and all of that. And I mean, he winds up in the Fort Leavenworth Hall of Fame. I mean, it's just incredible. But it's not just that he was a military leader and had this incredible military experience, as you mentioned. I mean, there's the legal experience, there's the educational experience. There's just so much about this one person who seemed to do so many interesting things. So when you think about his accomplishments, which accomplishment do you think might be the most overlooked?
Wow. I would say, again, to your point, and I've said this before, what I've been so impressed with Alexander Doniphan about is that he covered a lot of different topics. He was in my parlance, he was no one-hit wonder. He covered a lot of topics. One I think that is worth, and maybe it spans multiple areas. One that I think is really worth noting that maybe could be overlooked in some regards, and that is his contributions to the rule of law is something I think is really essential. Not just and you see that permeate several areas. Like, for example, you see that his contributions to the New Mexico Constitution with the Bill of Rights. And then you see it with his defense of what would be a tremendously minority religion at the time in Western Missouri. With his commitment to the rule of law. His view, as he said when he was ordered to execute the prisoners, that he wouldn't do it, and that he would hold them responsible. If they did it, he would hold them responsible before an earthly tribunal. So help me God, is what he said. And so that commitment, even in the face of tremendous challenges to the rule of law, I think was absolutely one of the contributions that, though certainly clearly something important, and maybe not necessarily overlooked, but as an undergirding of all that he did. So I think just an essential piece of what he stood for.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, certainly the whole idea of him not being a one-hit wonder. I mean, I think that's what you'll get when you borrow this book, which you can borrow it from Mid-Continent Public Library. I have to say that I'm the librarian on the panel, so you can borrow this. Or you can buy it as soon as Dave and I figure out how to make Amazon let you buy it. It will be available through Amazon. But you can also buy the digital version. The ebook is actually up and working right now, and you can purchase that through the Amazon Kindle store, through the Apple iTunes, as well as several other places. So So it is available and will be available in print as soon as we can get Amazon to play along with us. But I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the project itself and how this came to be. So many of you know that Mid-Continent Public Library has the Story Center. And it's an important program and an important service that we have. The idea behind the Story Center is that everyone has a story to tell, but not everyone might be ready to tell it. They might need a little bit of help, and they might need some assistance either in figuring out how to write better, how to formulate their ideas and their stories and their story arcs, make things interesting. And it's not only about telling traditional stories. I can see my friend Marilyn is online, and she's actually a traditional storyteller and a fabulous storyteller at that. And a lot of folks need help in just articulating a story, but sometimes it's about making a business pitch and making your business pitch more interesting, and the Story Center can help with that. But another way that the Story Center can help is that it can help communities tell stories, and that it's important for communities to be able to capture what it is that's important about them and to archive that and make that available for themselves and for their future generations. As we were building Woodneath and we were talking about the idea of the Story Center, one of the things that we thought was really, really important, or one of the things I used to say all the time, was that Jeff Bezos is interested in selling books, and we all know that, and that's great for him. But he's really, really not interested in like the poetry of Kansas City. He's not really that interested in the stories of your high school. He's not that interested in those things because you don't make a lot of money off of that. But we are, and we should be, because it's important for us to be able to archive those stories, not only for ourselves, but for our future generations. And so that was part of the origin of the Story Center, was to allow people to have these skills, which they may not have, but that they could use in everyday life, but then to use those skills to be able to capture what makes people uniquely them, whether it's traditional stories, writing down, beginning, middle, end, or maybe your story is your poetry, or maybe your story is your cooking, and you want to record all of your recipes and tell a few funny stories about your family. That was the idea behind the Story Center. And so the Story Center's been around, it came in existence right about the same time as the opening of the Woodneath Library, which may have been the first time Jeremiah and I actually met each other in person, was at the dedication. Our friend John Dillingham grabbed us and put us together because we knew that we would be friends, and he was right.
It worked.
And so that's been an important part of what the Woodneath Library Center is about helping people tell their stories. In terms of the Doniphan project, though, Jeremiah and I have been talking, because we have this shared interest in history, we have this shared interest in a lot of different things, and we kept talking about, wouldn't it be great if somebody wrote another biography? There is actually a very, very good biography on Alexander Doniphan. I think it's called Alexander Doniphan, Portrait of a Missouri Moderate. Yeah. And it's a really, really good scholarly approach. And we kept thinking, well, it might be fun to do that, and it might be really fun for somebody to get a hold of that. And same people who did Hamilton do, it was Alexander Doniphan.
Do a musical.
Right, but neither one of us, you don't want us to sing or dance either one. So we decided that might not be the way to go. But the other thing that came up was this whole idea of the Missouri Bicentennial was coming toward us, and coming toward us rather quickly. And we got to thinking, there's going to be a lot of opportunities in a lot of different ways for people to celebrate the Missouri Bicentennial. And some people are going to, they're going to get statues, and they're going to put them up in city parks, and they're going to dedicate those, and then 50 years from now, the city's going to have to keep maintaining.
Somebody's going to have to mow that.
And then they're going to have to mow. Yeah, and so wouldn't it be great if instead of doing that, we could contribute to the intellectual history of the state of Missouri by bringing people together and letting people tell stories about something or someone that has an important influence. And so you could tell about the person, the life, the times, so not just the person himself, but what was it like when this person lived, and then why should we care about this person. And what if you could get a bunch of people to contribute and write around that? Wouldn't that be great? Because that could be part of what the Story Center does. And then you could actually create this and then put it in the intellectual history of the state of Missouri, and we wouldn't actually be forcing future generations to mow the lawn, and to maintain it. And so the idea was, why not do this? Why not do something like a community writing project to help celebrate the Missouri bicentennial, and to find somebody worthy to do this? And since we've been talking about this, as well as our friends Chris Sizemore and John Dillingham and lots of our other friends, we decided we'd do it. So we put out the call, and I think after our initial call, we had like 3 entries.
Right.
And we were like, uh-oh, is this going to be a book or is it going to be a pamphlet?
Well, not only that, we had 3 entries, but they were primarily of historical, and
King and Battle.
Yeah, and so we were looking for something a little bit more, a little bit broader.
Right.
And I guess I would ask you in that regard, why look for different ways to tell the story?
Well, it's because that's what's important to everybody else, right? I mean, what makes history interesting to you? I mean, for some people, it really is the King and Battle history, and it's the dates, and knowing this happened, and then this happened, and then that happened. But for some people, what makes history interesting is where it happened, or the other people around, the folkways, if you will. What was life like in those times? Or, in fact, Brad Pace wrote a really interesting article in here, and really talked about antebellum courthouses. So the hook was, every place he's talking about, theoretically, Alexander Doniphan could have practiced law.
Right.
But it's a really neat article that talks about these old historic 19th century courthouses.
And how many of them are left, and how many are left, how they operated, and all of those. That was a fascinating article.
It's a great article. So the folkways were important. And then in some cases, we were also very, very interested in things like poetry. I mean, if somebody would have written some nice poetry, we would have wanted that. We were looking for a children's story, and we kept encouraging that.
Kept working on that one.
And it never quite worked. But I still say one of the most interesting submissions was your submission. And I'm not saying that because you're here. It was the idea that we're taking a historical figure, and you created a piece of historical fiction around a historical figure. And so what was there must have been a lot of different reasons to do, because you could have done a straight King and Battle history. Right. You could have done a legal history. I mean, given your faith history, you could have done a faith history of him.
Yeah.
What really inspired you to do a piece of historical fiction?
Well, 2 things really. As I thought about it, we already had the King and Battle. We had that element. So it's something we didn't really need, and so we needed some diversity in the storytelling and the approach to it. And I'm a trial lawyer by practice, and so I love trials, and I've been in many jury trials and bench trials and things like that. And the experience that you go through is pretty dramatic, and it really is conducive to storytelling. And I thought, well, I have a couple of paragraphs here about an actual trial that Alexander Doniphan conducted. It was actually conducted in Independence, but I set it in Platte City, which is a slightly different for several reasons. But I took those 2 paragraphs, and it gave me an opportunity to kind of take a look at it, maybe from my own eyes, but try to superimpose what it would have been like and what people would have experienced at that time, what he would have experienced. And I injected some of his own historical background within the story. And so it just gave me a chance to tell a little bit of a different story and be a little creative and fill in a few gaps with some of my own thoughts about my own practice. So I suspect, maybe if I'm honest with myself, I'm projecting a little bit of myself into the story as well, or at least what I think might be the better parts of what I might do as a lawyer. So that it serves sort of that purposes, and it was really a fun project to do.
Well, and I think it works well with the anthology. So, I mean, part of what the fun of the anthology is you do read a couple of interesting sort of King and Battle history, and then you can read Jeremiah's fictional account, and it really does sort of tie a lot of it together, creates a little bit of more of a human feel to it, as opposed to being a little bit more cold like you would traditionally find with some stuff. I mean, one of ours, the Crow submission is practically an outline I mean, it really is very
straight down the line.
Straight down the line.
Right.
And so having something that's a little bit warmer like that is definitely worthwhile.
And with respect to Alexander Doniphan, we had quite a bit to work with. We had, for example, a march that was written in honor of him. So we had some musical parts there that we could work on and work in. I want to ask you a lot of questions, Steve, but let me ask you. This is something, going back to the Storytelling Center and what Woodneath and Mid-Continent Public Library are trying to do with this, that seems to me very unique for libraries. And what inspired you? What inspired the Mid-Continent Public Library to really, delve into storytelling and making that an important aspect of the library system?
It's a long story. So one of the things that I'll say is check out The First Beverly Hillbilly. Again, another book that's published by Woodneath Press. And there is a really good foreword in that explains all of it.
Goes through that whole detail.
Yeah, but as a book publisher and as a book publisher and an author, I always have to constantly be plugging these things. So, but I think one of the things that we discovered right around the turn of the last century, and even about halfway through the turn of the last century, we started seeing that there were a lot of people who were trying to have complex discussions in 140 characters.
Yeah.
And you can't do that. It just doesn't work that way. And we discovered that people just really weren't communicating well with one another. And so a way to enhance critical thinking is to be able to, come up with your idea, write your idea, explain your idea to other people. So that was happening over here. Over here, at the same time, what was happening is vanity press. So people were able to load stuff into CreateSpace, hit a couple of buttons, have a book, and then they wanted the library to put that book in the library collection, which frankly had not been edited, was not of good quality.
Went through no process.
Went through no process. And so we kept thinking to ourselves, gosh, wouldn't it be great if instead of the library always being on the back end of the story collection, what if we were on the front end of the story collection?
Yeah.
What if we could help people create better stories and tell better stories? And you know what? If they print one of these things, that's great. Great, it's sort of like an unrelated positive outcome or output, because what we really want is for people to be better critical thinkers and better at communicating.
Yeah.
And if we can help with those skills, great. And if they end up writing a book, even better. And so that was kind of the idea. I mean, I think the Story Center, Dave can actually respond to this when we bring him back. But I think the Story Center is up to, or Woodneath Press, is up to maybe 6 or 7 books that we've now published. Simon & Schuster has nothing to worry about with us, because that's not what we're really about. What we're about is helping people tell
And really,
stories.
community project. It's for community, and it's more localized in that sense. So
very much so. I mean, so many of our things are really, again, it's like I was saying before. Jeff Bezos doesn't really care about Kansas City poetry. So if we had a bunch of people who wanted to write poems about, the wonder of the Meyer Circle, then we could have, that would be something we would be interested in publishing.
Yeah.
I don't know that Amazon's necessarily going to be interested in publishing that.
Well, that returns us back to the subject matter. Alexander Doniphan, somebody of unique importance to our community, local community, and to our state. Maybe not so much outside of our state, but certainly somebody that has had influence and bringing us back to thinking critically about his times and his influence, not only then, but also his continuing influence to today. So,
True enough, and actually I think that there was nothing more obvious. The foreword is a really good introduction to that. Former Senator and former Ambassador John Danforth wrote the foreword to the book, and really did talk about the importance of somebody who's not as interested in his or her tribe, but is interested in doing the right thing.
Right.
And that's probably, Jeremiah called it the one-hit wonder. For me, it's, it seemed like he was always at this crossroads and somehow always figured out how to do the right thing.
How to work it through.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think if you're good with that, let's turn it back to Dave,
Let's
because
do
I
it.
think Dave might have a few questions for us. And of course, we had a question for Dave, which is how many books has Woodneath Press published now?
That is a great question. We're actually up to 9.
9.
Yes, it's our 9th book, and our 10th one comes out next month. Very excited.
That's great. That's great.
So we had a number of comments and some questions, a lot of engagement. So I'm going to go ahead and post some of these up here and give you a chance to answer these folks. So this one is asking about the contributors for the book. Would you mind speaking about the contributors?
Yeah.
There were a lot.
There were a lot. We had, from a categorical standpoint, we had professors of history. I know we had some, not just professors of history, but we had some historians that contributed. We had some amateurs that wrote. Amateurs, we're all amateurs, but students that were studying that wrote some pieces. We had lawyers that wrote some pieces that, Brad Pace that Steve mentioned, as well as Alan Jones wrote a piece. He's a lawyer that was in Liberty. And so several really nice pieces from just a variety of different categories. And I suppose we could name them all off.
There's 14. There are 14 people who contributed to the book. And one of the things that I should say is that in terms of chapters, there's 18 chapters, not including the epilogue and the forewords. And so some people wrote more than one thing, so that happened. But also there are some reprints in here that are worth noticing. So the very first article, the very first thing that we have in here is actually a reprint from Kansas City newspaper, which is contemporary. It actually it actually came out during Doniphan's lifetime. Yeah. The second article was a submission that was part of the Missouri Centennial Project article about Alexander Doniphan. So there's a couple of reprints that are in here as well. I really don't think anyone would want us to read all 14 names, but we can definitely share that via email.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And not only did they contribute, one of the things we wanted to also accomplish is, as best we could, collect all the pictures and materials related to Doniphan, so we could get those, and those are also in there in the appendix and used throughout the book as well. So it's not just words, but it goes through and it has pictures of Doniphan, pictures of his wife and his children, pictures of paintings, different things throughout the book as well to make it visually enjoyable as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
true.
And it is a beautiful book, if I may say.
It is.
Yes. So we have another question asking about the film of the 50s TV show, including Alexander Doniphan. Does that still exist?
I think this is talking about the Profiles in Courage.
I don't think it was a 50s show, but yes, there's a description of it and a story specifically discussing the Profiles in Courage, and that NBC, I think it's an NBC program that a professor wrote about Alexander Doniphan. So it does capture that. So that was something really exciting to get in. It's sort of as we were continuing to search for different types of articles, that one came in as well. So that was wonderful.
Yeah, and it does exist. I mean, I know it exists. I didn't actually watch it when I was doing the work on this. One of the things that we were looking to do in terms of getting permission. So that's always one of the most challenging things in any project like this, is finding the stuff that people submit to you and looking at it and saying, oh, this is a wonderful picture, but we can't reprint it because it's not in the public domain. And if we reprint it, it's going to cost us $100,000 or something like that. Right. And so constantly struggling with permissions, finding things in the public domain. I did find the Profiles in Courage episode on a streaming service. It wasn't on Hulu or something like, it's like deep in the internet. You could find it and you could download it for, I don't know, $3.99 or something like that. Right. And I just didn't pause to watch it because my purpose was to try to see if I could if I could actually get permission to use the stills, which
Right.
it didn't tell me who actually owned
Didn't know-
the
yeah.
intellectual property, so I just kept moving. So there we go. Looks like Brent may have actually updated, might have actually posted a link to that. So,
Oh, that's
so
nice.
thank you, Brent.
Before I forget, I do want to say, by the way, the inspiration for the title of the book, "The Will of Missouri." Now, I mean, it's a play on words a little bit.
It is a play
because
on words,
He's a
yeah.
lawyer, and I'm not sure that he wrote any wills, but
Right.
but it comes from the fact that his middle name is William, is Alexander William Doniphan, and his friends called him Will, and so that's what we wanted to play a little bit on words there with the will and the fortitude of somebody, but also his name that his friends called him.
So now you can impress your friends. You have a trivia question for this weekend. So.
Right, exactly.
So here's a question: if he was involved in local politics.
Well, one thing I will say is that living in this particular time, it was almost impossible not to be involved in some level of politics. I mean, if you think about the Thomas Hart Benton, no, I'm sorry, George Caleb Bingham.
Yeah, Caleb Bingham.
Yeah, a photo of the election day and things like that. That was his contemporary time period. I mean, so that's what would have looked like. But
And beyond just the
Right.
natural consequences of being in small communities at the time, he
was elected.
Yeah,
He
he
was an
ran
elected
three
official.
separate times for state legislature. At three separate times, not just sequentially. So he was in the Missouri legislature on three separate occasions, and so was deeply involved in public as a politician. But as you can imagine, David Rice Atchison was his partner, who became a senator and
president
actually,
for a day.
And the Senate pro tem,
Right.
President pro tem of the Senate and for the United States, and so we know that they had long conversations. And as I said, ultimately they were sort of divided when the Civil War, leading up to the Civil War. They were divided in their views on that and split because of that. So
Right. Well, and so one of the things, and you'll see in here, we actually, through permission, because we did everything the way you're supposed to, we contacted the County Commission of Caldwell County in Missouri. And they allowed us to reprint their entire history of Caldwell County from their website in the book. And so that's one of our reprints. But he is important because Doniphan's important.
Right.
He was responsible for Caldwell County and
Yeah.
Davies County.
Yeah,
He was
speaking of politician, and connecting this to his work with the church and representation of the church, he actually introduced and was passed the creation of Caldwell County and Davies County, which were to be for the settlement of the church and its members because of the challenges that were happening with Missourians and members of the church. And so he was responsible for that piece of legislation. I went back and looked in the Supreme Court Library of the state of Missouri and looked at that legislation that was drafted all those many years ago to create that, and it's pretty fascinating. But he was deeply involved in politics, and one of the outcomes, really wonderful outcomes, is trying to make peace through legislation in that sense, because of the challenges, the conflicts that had happened or were happening. So
Right. So yes, that's true.
So this is a question asking about how this project might seed similar products throughout Missouri and tied to the bicentennial.
Well, this question is asked by David Jackson, who is one of our contributors, and I think David might be looking for more opportunities to write more history, if I know David. But no, seriously, the idea about this project was that we wanted this to be a model for all the communities in Missouri, and the idea is to, if far be it from us to say who or what is the important thing in your community. That's up to you to decide. And it doesn't have to be a person. It could be a place or an event or something.
It could be an event right.
It doesn't really matter. But identify the thing that makes your neighborhood, your place, an important place here in 2021. And then the idea is to get your friends together and start doing a little bit of research and doing a little bit of writing and possibly talk to some folks in the educational community in your town, and just start writing, and so that you can contribute to this. And I've been talking about this with all my library director friends throughout the whole state of Missouri. They are very familiar with this project. If you went to them and said, hey, we've got an idea for a project just like this, just like the Will of Missouri that they did at Mid-Continent, and we've been collecting stories, and we want to do this as part of our celebration, not only would they know what you're talking about, because I've been talking about it for over a year, but Michael Sweeney, who is responsible, he's the person who's primarily responsible for the Missouri Bicentennial, he might be watching, he might not be watching, but Michael knows very much about what's been going on with this and has been very supportive of this notion of local communities collecting their history and being able to share that as part of the Missouri Bicentennial. And so for me, I think it's just really important for people to be able to collect what is the important thing in their community, because people don't care about what goes on outside of, we tend to think about things in big national ways now. They don't think about the little things. Why is Route 66 important in your town in Southwest Missouri? Write that story. That's what we need to do.
I'll give you an example of that. My office is in the Supreme Court of Missouri building, the Supreme Court building, and there is a statue there of a dog, Old Drum.
Oh yeah.
And this is Warrensburg. It's really important, and it's part of their community history. And so much so that the legislature passed some legislation about Old Drum. So that's an example. It doesn't have to be a person, doesn't have to be necessarily a place or an event, but it could be something like that, Old Drum out of Warrensburg, Missouri. So.
Well, and Michael tells a great story about this malted ice cream dessert, the Dusty Miller. You'll have to track down Michael and ask him about that, because I don't remember exactly which town that came from, but this is an idea. This is a culinary item that connects this particular community. So, I think we're very much in supporting this idea of collecting the stories of your community and trying to make that a way to celebrate the bicentennial without putting a burden on future generations, actually giving them a real gift for future generations.
As I think about the importance of something like this, it's they say, and I don't how true or not, if you don't learn from your history, you're doomed to repeat it, right? So as we think about it, as we explore those things, and we talk about the challenges, frankly, the challenges and that it gives rise to, or the wonderful things that it gives rise to, it makes us think about those things and revisit, what was happening then? How can we think critically, as you said, Steve? How can we think critically through these issues for our day and think about it in that way? And the last thing I would say on what your comments is that you and the committee worked with the Bicentennial Committee for Missouri through the whole process, kept them informed, and in fact, on the front cover is the endorsement of the Bicentennial Committee. So it's been a great collaborative project where we've kept them informed, which has been great.
But just because it's 2021 now, that doesn't mean you're too late. This is the way for you to celebrate 2021. And you can publish it in 2022 or 2023, it doesn't really matter, but if you did it in 2021, then that would be the way for your community to potentially celebrate. And it's something you can do at home. It's something that you can do under COVID requirements, and so.
And really, it just takes a core group that's interested, a few people that are interested that can help drive that forward. Steve and I have been talking about it for a little while. We got support from some others, and we brought in some very talented people. I don't want to not say these names. We didn't mention the authors, but. We wouldn't be here holding up this beautiful product without Cindy McDavid and Lori Garcia, as well as some others at the Woodneath Library. But they did a tremendous work to get this to its end.
That's absolutely true. Yes.
So.
Well, this is just a quick clarifying question about Amazon, and I can speak to this if you'd like, Steve.
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead, Dave. Actually, Dave and I have been struggling with this for about a week now, but yeah, go ahead.
So just for clarification, the ebook is available now. The print book will be available soon. We're just having some difficulties with production, but it will be up and available. So thank you all for your patience, and just kind of keep your eyes open for
Yeah, it's really just, I would suggest it's really just a matter of the tech, as we loaded the information on Amazon so Amazon could sell it, for some reason it's not making it available. It's there, it's just not making it available for you to buy it. So we have a trouble ticket in, it's all going to be good. And if you happen to be an ebook reader, you're good go. You can download it today.
And it looks beautiful on the ebook. It really does.
Well, again, that's thanks to Lori. I mean,
Yeah.
Lori was our volunteer graphic designer, did this wonderful cover. But as you look inside, one of the things we decided to do, there are pictures throughout, but one of the things that we did inside, which you won't be able to see this, but you can see that there's like a full picture spread as the face for each chapter. And Lori did a wonderful job of laying all of those out. And so, yeah.
Tremendous work.
So is there going to be plans to collect more stories for the bicentennial?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question. And I don't know if the question is related to just Alexander Doniphan or more broadly about other things. I think Steve spoke eloquently about the need, really, the opportunity to collect those throughout our communities throughout Missouri for this time period. But I will say, with respect to Doniphan, I think, at least I am always looking to collect stories. And in fact, I posted on my social media account about this evening, about the book launch, and somebody said they have the journals of somebody that was in the march.
Right.
I
read that.
Yeah, which I thought was fascinating. I was thinking to myself, boy, we'd have loved to slip that one in.
Right.
But yeah, we're certainly looking to continue to collect those things as we continue to develop and the story and the history around Alexander Doniphan.
And this comment came in, I thought it was just connected to what you were saying.
Right. Actually, and Kathleen Burt, who I believe is a contributor. Yeah. I believe Kathleen was a contributor for us. But now, interestingly, I was talking about Doniphan. That collection that you're talking about that's in the State Historical Society may have actually been my first introduction to Alexander Doniphan, now that I'm thinking about it, because I remember this is when I was working on my undergraduate degree in history. So that was only like 2 years after Alexander Doniphan marched to New Mexico, right?
Oh boy.
but I actually, one of the things I had to do in my historiography class was to take a look at an original document. And I remember it was an Alexander Doniphan letter was what I was actually looking at. And I think it was part of that collection, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. A lot of wonderful collections like that. It's actually quite remarkable that you can go to the Historical Society or to the State Archives and you can, under proper circumstances, handle some of those original documents. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. I'm thinking of, Alexander Doniphan had, as I mentioned, a significant influence in saving the life of the founders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Joseph Smith and his companions, and the extermination order which gave rise to the events is actually there in the state archives, and you can, under the proper circumstances, handle it, which is pretty amazing.
And under the with a lot less rigor, you can actually see an image of that in this book as well. We made that available. Right. The other thing that was interesting, it's a reprint. There's a newspaper article in here about music that they found, the march that Jeremiah was talking about. So not everybody gets to have music written in their honor, but Alexander Doniphan did, and then it became sort of this mythical thing, because no one could actually find the sheet music. And then it showed up in a collection at Yale. And it was actually replayed. So we reprinted the article on that, but then we were also able to actually reprint the sheet music. So now it's not going to be hard for people to find. If you ever want to if you can read the music, and if you want to actually perform the Doniphan March,
it's there.
It's actually here in this book now.
Yeah.
It's easy for people to get to. So.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Is there an ebook available through the library or only print? We are working on making, I contacted our collection development department today as the ebook version went up on the commercial sites. And as soon as it's available on Overdrive, they will get a copy on Overdrive for people to be able to check out. But there are print versions available for checkout from the library right now. So it's kind of a mixed bag. You can actually get the print version from the library, but you can buy the ebook version, and then eventually it'll be the other way around, that you'll be able to buy the print version and borrow the ebook version. So.
And I'm sure I'll try to get a few signatures from Steve, so I'll have a few signed books from Steve before I get out of here. So tonight.
That'll be the challenge for somebody, is to see if they can actually get all 14 people to sign a copy at some point. That'll be the big challenge.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, be great. I know. I have a question that I wanted to ask Jeremiah before we ask any other questions and wrap things up. What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? Well, I've got two books that I'm reading right now. The first one is is a church book. It's that I'm reading this year. It's called the Doctrine and Covenants. So I've been reading that. Began at the first of the year, and now in addition to that, I'm reading a Bill Bryson book, an author that I really like, called The Body, and it's really sort of a description, head to toe, of the body. This is fascinating writing. I'm now into the not five senses. We have many more than five senses. I'm now into the senses and his description of that. So those are the two. One is my faith, my spiritual book, the Doctrine and Covenants, and then the other one is my I try to learn. I try to develop my understanding of different subjects, and so it's in that vein. How about you? I'd ask the same thing.
Yeah, well, I just started a new one, Apollo Zero, which Apollo Zero is about the pandemic, and sort of the hook on the what's really interesting is I just started it, and so it's just talking about the discovery of COVID-19 and the Wuhan market and all of that, and it's amazing to me. It's only a year ago, but how much I've forgotten about the early days of the pandemic, just because so much has happened in the last year. But the purpose of Apollo Zero really is to talk about the changes that we've been through over the last year, and some of those things that aren't necessarily going to go away. The way that the pandemic is going to have a long-term impact on us. And so I'm excited to carry on and keep reading on that. But just started that. This weekend I finished How the South Won the Civil War, which was an interesting book. And then there is a book that isn't out yet that I'm really excited to get a hold of. It's called A Fire Bell in the Past, The Missouri Crisis at 200. And it is a book on the Missouri Compromise and what became known as the Missouri Question. And certainly this is one of those that the history you don't know, you might be doomed to repeat. Because as I was talking to as I was listening to the author talk about this book, what he was talking about was the whole idea that it was at the time of the Missouri Question that Americans began to view themselves as two separate Americas, that there was this America and that America over the issue of slavery. And up until the point of the Missouri Question, that was not clear. Well, I think some people might argue that until 4, 6, 8 years ago, people may not have thought that there was two Americas, but they think there is now. And so it's really interesting that, again, sort of history, maybe not repeating, but maybe rhyming.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Some shadow of it, or at least some image of it.
So interesting, again, Missouri Bicentennial Project, interesting to read, probably really dry history, but the type of thing that I can't wait for it to come out.
Well, I'm a big fan of storytelling. It's something that I love. I can remember hearing from my grandfather just some amazing stories, beginning with his connection to Buffalo Bill Cody. And so I love storytelling. And if you don't mind, I'll ask you one more question. And that is, what do you think, as you look to the future of storytelling, what will that look like? And what can viewers, readers, our community do to keep the tradition of storytelling alive going forward?
Well, yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. I think one of the things that's important to understand about storytelling is that it doesn't necessarily have to fit into one container. Because things have been changing quite a lot. Between the whole idea of the personal narrative storytelling, veteran stories, things like that, that it's not necessarily always about sitting around a campfire, and it's not necessarily always about, you know, traditional fairy tales and things like that that you might hear, but there are lots of different ways that people can tell stories. And certainly one of the things that the library believes is the whole idea of the mashup story. So one of the things that we're looking forward to doing pretty soon is opening our Culinary Literacy Center and starting to adopt a new program around culinary literacy, learning and reading and information through food and diet, but then also, obviously, food is an important way that people tell stories and connect with their culture. And so the idea of telling stories through the food that we eat and how we eat it, and the celebrations that we have with the food is going to be another important connection, I would say. But the one thing that I think that we've discovered is that anyone with a microphone and a computer can start a podcast. And so in some cases, there is more opportunity in much the same way that we were getting inundated with the books from CreateSpace. In some ways, there are more and more stories, raw material out there than ever before. But the thing is that there's a lot of good source material out there too that some people aren't necessarily fully taking advantage of. So we're at the Midwest Genealogy Center in Independence, and just right over there is one of the great collections of family history and local histories that you'll ever find. And so you could go over there and you could find out all these great stories and craft. It doesn't necessarily have to be, again, a king in battle. It could be like your Doniphan story, where you take some interesting components and create something, create an interesting story to share with your family. So I think the future of storytelling is very bright, because there's a lot of different ways that you can get people to collect and to share stories. Even things like the Tell Me a Story kits that we have, where you can check out a recorder and you can go and record the stories of your parents and grandparents and family members. And we can help you with that. We can help you with those oral histories and oral storytelling. It's something that we live to do all the time. So
just a neat place at Woodneath with the storytelling center there.
Yep.
It's a great opportunity to keep those stories alive.
Well, Dave, I think we're getting toward 7:30. Is it time for us to start wrapping up?
It is. We have one more question pop in. So asking about the Tell Me a Story project.
So sure. So Tell Me a Story is an oral history project that we have at the Midwest Genealogy Center. And so we have kits that you can check out, which is nice, because I mean, you don't necessarily want to record everything on your cell phone necessarily. So we have a kit with some sample interview questions that you can take with your family and your story. And the whole idea behind this originally, when Cheryl Lang, the librarian here at the Genealogy Center, and I were talking about this, was that you hear this all the time, that you go to these family dinners, or we used to go to family dinners before 2020,
Right.
and we would sit around and you'd tell the same old tired stories over and over and over again, and then all of a sudden you'd realize after a while the people telling those stories weren't here anymore, and then you couldn't remember the stories. And wouldn't it be great if we would have had these? So we created these kits, and you can take them to your family reunions, to your really anywhere that you can think of. And what we do is we, like I said, we supply questions and the hardware. You can bring them to us. We will create a copy that we curate here of, and we do make those available if you allow us to make them available, so that you can hear other people's family stories, which is really kind of fun sometimes. So it's a great collection. We also have a recording booth here at the Genealogy Center that you can come and share your story. And pretty soon, as soon as the interior of the house is done up at the Woodneath Library Center, we'll have a recording booth there for people to be able to record their stories as well.
That's fantastic.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you both for being here and talking about this amazing book and project. And thank all of you for chiming in with your questions and your comments. I hope we're able to get to everyone's. I apologize if we didn't, but I really appreciate you being engaged with us. As we leave, Jeremiah or Steve, do you have any parting thoughts?
I did. I mean, I was pantomiming it, but seriously, thank you for joining us, and thank you for the interaction and the questions. I mean, Jeremiah and I were worried that we would just be sitting here and ended up talking about talking about just
which we don't mind, but
boring lawyer stuff and things like that. But no, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for helping us celebrate this project. It really was a great experience for us, and we hope that you enjoyed learning more about Alexander Doniphan.
And I would just end maybe with just a word of encouragement to tell your stories, record your stories. I know Steve talked about it and talked about the resources that are available. Generations from now will love the things that you have recorded. Even if it seems insignificant to you at this time, even if it seems like so ordinary, those things can be treasured. And whether it's your story or it's relative or something in your community or some event or whatever it may be, let's keep telling those stories. And I would say, we want to be real about it, but let's find stories that go to the heart of our human experience and help others, lift and strengthen others as well. So, thank you all. Thanks for participating. Thanks especially to Steve, honestly, and the Mid-Continent Public Library for just being tremendous supporters of this effort.
Excellent. Well said. Thank you. All right. Well, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.